Hi there, welcome back to the 2013 film blog, and let's now move on to The Comedian, which was released, I think, a good few months ago now, but I finally caught it last week. I believe it's a co-production between the UK and Russia, and it's a very, very small, low-budget indie film set in London, and it features a young chap called Ed, who is a worker in a call centre. And also on the side, he is a stand-up comedian. We see Ed going about his life in his rather dull job in a really, really horrible call centre in which he has to basically wander around selling cancer insurance over the phone. And that gets juxtaposed with his life as a stand-up comedian, in which we see him go into various clubs and bars and doing a stand-up routine, which at times falls flat on its face. And certainly one night in which he's really had a bad night, he's properly died on stage. He's taking the bus home and he's confronted by a young man, Nathan, who's just been to see him at his show. And they fall into a rapport, they start talking. What's quite nice is that you actually start to see the genuinely funny side of Ed, and that he could be funny and a truly good comedian if he could let himself go, because the way he talks with Nathan is an awful lot less stilted and funnier than his stand-up routine he's performed just now on stage. Ultimately, Nathan and Ed end up becoming lovers, and one night Ed decides to take Nathan out to meet his friends, including his flatmate. Nathan gets on very, very well with Ed's friends, and as is the way in these things, unfortunately Ed gets a bit jealous of how well Nathan's getting on with his friends, in particular his flatmate. So Ed storms off and goes home. Later that night, his flatmate arrives back home, and they have sort of a heart-to-heart in which she confesses that she has feelings for him. They have a brief kiss. I think more are made of it. But sort of you've now got this potentially destructive triangle going on between Ed, Nathan and the flatmate, in which there's a lot of lusts flying around in between and a lot of jealousies between what's going on. And you can see potentially where it's going to go. Interposed with all this, we are shown the gradual destruction of Ed's working life, because he's not hitting his targets and he's becoming more and more sarcastic and difficult for his line manager to work with, who he's not a great manager, but at the same time you can sort of see where he's coming from, in that Ed is constantly undermining him, and they have basically a few training sessions in which Ed basically is told unless he can start to get his sales sorted, he'll lose his job, because ultimately the job is all about how much you can sell, and Ed isn't selling, and therefore if he can't start getting his sales to improve, then he'll be gone. And basically Ed sort of loses after this and ends up pouring water over his boss and storming out and obviously quitting his job. And he ends up going back and finding Nathan and apologising for having stormed off the previous night and all this kind of thing, and they decide they're going to make a go of it together. It then cuts to rather a good scene on a night bus going home, in which Ed's housemate is obviously upset over something. We aren't really sure what. And Nathan is being a bit confrontational towards her. We think we're now sort of beginning to understand exactly what's happened here, in that Nathan must know about the relationship between Ed and his flatmate, and potentially might know about the case that's gone on and her declaring her feelings for Ed. We're not really sure. And at this point, some girls on the night bus start to basically interject, and they get Nathan more and more riled up, and eventually he snaps at them, and it almost sends into a fight before Ed drags Nathan off the bus, and they stand there in the street having this standoff between the two of them, and you can just see the whole relationship is starting to crumble into nothingness because there's so much jealousy on both sides. Nathan is jealous of the relationship with Ed and his flatmates and the romantic allusions thereof, whereas Ed is jealous of Nathan and his ability to innately get on with people that he can't do. So the relationship pretty much ends then and there. Ed goes back to his flat and his flatmate tells him, sorry, that she can't have him there anymore at the flat with her, he has to leave. And so it ends up, it's a beautiful film, it's very, very well done. I think the last act is nowhere near as strong as the first two, because the final act ends with, first of all, Ed going up to see his family and then coming back, and the final scenes are him just chatting to a taxi driver, and they've both got problems and they both talk problems through with each other, and they both decide they're going to be okay. So it's a very, very much ambiguous ending that I wasn't a huge fan of, and certainly I felt that that last act didn't stack up, because the first two acts are very, very strong. It reminds me in many ways of Joanna Hogg's Archipelago from a few years ago, in that it takes basically a very, very cosy domestic scene, and not an awful lot really happens in the course of the film. It's just you watching some exceptionally well realised characters, because certainly the dialogue and the discussions, it all feels very, very, very natural, and they all talk like they are real people, and you do genuinely believe this is a situation that could happen. Certainly the discussion between Ed and his boss are well realised. I think anyone who's worked within a call centre will recognise the conversations that they're having and the struggles that Ed has to actually get enthused about what is pretty much a meaningless job that's really, really not a pleasant way to be earning your money. So I mean, it's not a bad film. I mean, chances are you won't get to see it because it's on an exceptionally small release. Obviously I've only just seen it. It's come out. It's for one showing only. On I think it was a Thursday afternoon. So it was a very, very limited release. But I mean, it's well worth seeing. Certainly, it's an example of the current crop of decent young British filmmakers who are making, on a low budget, a lot of very, very good independent films. Like I said, I would refer back to things like Archipelago, or things like Fish Tank by Andrea Arnold. You've got these kind of very, very gritty, very, very realistic British dramas that are being done exceptionally well at the moment. It certainly, I don't think, is going to trouble anyone's top 10 lists of the year. I mean, it was, I think, one of Sight and Sound's films of the month when it first came out. I don't think I'll put it anything like as high as that. It may have been just a bad month for film, I don't really know. But I certainly wouldn't put it in any of my lists of top films of the month. I mean, it certainly started off exceptionally well, but it tailed off towards the end, and by the end, certainly the ending just seemed to me to be a bit ambiguous, and it's a bit kind of, well, so he thinks he'll be okay. It was sort of Gone with the Wind, but in modern London, just I'll be okay. And I didn't really agree with how that was done. I'd rather have actually seen perhaps an epilogue in which we saw what he did. Does he go and try and make a living on the comedy circuit? Does he end up going back to a different call centre? What happens with him and Nathan? They find and get together. What happens with him and the flatmates? Do they sort things out? All these questions are left unresolved, and perhaps that's the intention of the film, I don't know, but certainly for me it was disappointment. So I mean, if you do get a chance to see it, it sounds like your kind of thing. By all means, it's not a complete waste of time, but I think certainly the ending, for me, just felt like a bit of a cop out, and it left too many things unresolved and incomplete for me to be completely happy with it. But other than that, not a bad film. Certainly not a bad addition to the current crop of independent English and British films. The version of London they have is exceptionally well realised, and it's certainly the confrontation on the night bus. I think we've all seen those in our times. That's pretty well done. There's certainly plenty of things to like about it, but there are also plenty of things to like a bit less. So perhaps catch it, perhaps don't. I'll speak to you soon. Try.